All right, I think we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to From Camera to Court, an attorney's guide to storing surveillance. We are excited to host this webinar today. It turns out that storing surveillance is oftentimes more complicated than you think due to many factors. And so we are going to talk about that today. So let me just briefly introduce Amanda Podlucky. First of all, I'm Lauren O'Brien. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Cloudastructure. Happy to host and facilitate the conversation today with Amanda Podlucky. We have partnered with Amanda before on various topics. She is a partner at Cobb Gonzalez, where she serves as the leader of the firm's general liability practice group. Amanda focuses her practice on representing clients in premises liability matters, including aggressively defending hotels, restaurants, retailers, recreational facilities, and multifamily housing facilities against personal injury, negligent security, and related general liability claims. So welcome aboard, Amanda, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm so happy to be here. I know there's a lot to talk about with surveillance. I'm excited to dive into these issues.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Cobb and Gonzalez?
Sure. So we are a Florida-based litigation firm. We have offices in Jacksonville and Orlando. We service the entire state, all the way from Miami, all the way through the Panhandle. We have a number of different practice areas. As you mentioned, general liability is a big one. And then we also do a lot of construction defect, business litigation, and we have a few other practices that deal with real estate and also some alternative dispute resolution services.
And then, of course, many of you know who have joined today and others who are new to Cloudastructure. We are perhaps the leading multifamily cloud-based AI security company in the country. We provide total solutions around AI surveillance and remote guarding, as well as remote guarding services. Happy to talk about that solution a little further on as we discuss how to store footage. But let's dive into it. Because as you know, and you've experienced this a lot, Amanda, tell us a little bit about how surveillance can be your best witness.
Sure. So for any case, especially cases that really involve multifamily housing properties, there are a number of claims that might come up. You have your general slip and fall claims, which are probably going to be the most common types of claims in a liability setting, your slip and fall, trip and fall type of cases. And what's really interesting about these is that even though they seem so similar to, everybody, you think a slip and fall and a trip and fall is the same. Most states actually handle the law around trip and fall and slip and falls very differently in terms of what you're looking at. So these are actually really two different types of cases, but your basic premises case is what you're going to see the most of. After that, I think, the next most relevant issue to properties would be dog bite cases. We see a lot of dog bite cases. Obviously, when you have a pet policy, you allow either service animals or pets. This is something that's probably going to come up, unfortunately, especially in properties that might have, things like a dog park. Next, criminal activity related liability. There's a couple of different things to talk about with this one. This could be anything from your negligent security claim, such as somebody coming on the property, a criminal third party, and unfortunately causing harm to a resident or a guest, or even in this situation where there might be a crime that occurs on or around the property where the police are getting involved and want to rely on the property and the property surveillance and things like that for their investigation. So in the context of criminal situations, there's a number of different claims and situations that could arise. Disputes over evictions and lease violations, of course, are going to be something that comes up a lot. Accidents in parking lots, property damage claim that could involve a motor vehicle accident, a pedestrian, property damage. We have like break-ins and things like that, vandalism maybe, false allegations of harassment or misconduct. This is something that's going to come up, but maybe not as important in the surveillance context, depending on where it happens, of course, because most of those types of cases might happen within a unit or a private office. But to the extent that they happen in a public place or a common area, that's something that could be really helpful with those types of claims. Unauthorized access and squatter disputes, something that's, comes up a lot with properties that surveillance can definitely help out with. Any type of investigation is going to shed a lot of light on those types of claims. Of course, pet issues, service animal versus pet policies, unauthorized pets being on the property, and then inadequate maintenance leading to injury, which goes back to really a number of those claims. But that could deal with anything from stairwells, balconies, elevated surfaces, things like that, where you might have surveillance cameras capturing those types of areas.
Great. Before we jump into this even further, you might see a poll on your window here for the attendees. If you want to fill out our small poll, it'd be great to kind of see what you all think about liability claims there. But Amanda, it says here there's a different handling for resident and non-resident claims. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure, and this is something that I think we're going to get into in the next couple of topics here, but it's really important when you have these types of claims come up. If it's a resident that lives on property, that continues living on property, especially after any type of these incidents arise, you're going to have a wealth of information. You're going to have access to a lot more information about the individual leading up to the incident, at the time of the incident, and then following the incident that you can really use to gather information and conduct a really thorough investigation. Whereas if it's a guest of a resident or someone, maybe a delivery person, for example, even who's delivering food, you have a lot of Uber Eats and DoorDash and things like that, pizza delivery people, a lot of people coming on your property who aren't residents, you're not going to have as much access to information as you would with a resident. So when we get into a lot of the discussions
Yeah.
about preservation and what types of things are available to gather right away, it's really going to come into play, the type of claim it is, the type of person involved in the incident.
And as you've been doing this for many years, of course, there's some best practices that are emerging, but let's talk about some of those.
So, anytime you have a situation come up, it's obviously really important to gather as much information as quickly as possible. Things happen, memories fade, information is lost. So, it is really important that as soon as a property or an employee or whoever learns about the incident, as soon as it's reported, we need to make sure that we're taking proactive steps to gather as much information as possible, because you never know if or when a claim might pop up down the road. Sometimes it could be years before you even know that a claim might be happening or, asserted, and by that point it might be too late to go back and do a lot of this stuff. So first thing, fill out an incident report. I know a lot of companies are going to have a policy on this. They're going to have a form that needs to be filled out. Fill it out. Be as detailed as possible with filling out your incident report. Include as much information as you can about who was involved, who witnessed it, where it happened. Most importantly, do not show the incident report to the person involved in the incident. That could waive very important privileges down the road. So it's very important that the information is gathered either separately on a notepad or through some other means, and then transferred to the incident report later on in privacy, so that privilege is really preserved. Don't give them a copy. Don't have them sign it. If a person's really insisting that they be part of the incident reporting process, have them fill out a separate statement, in their own writing on a separate piece of paper that you can then attach to the incident report. So it's really important that you have them tell their story, but not in a way that you could compromise the privilege. So as far as, the incident report, there's other things besides the incident report that you are going to want to include. For example, photographs. As soon as you know something happened, whether it's property damage, an accident, a slip and fall, dog bite, whatever the case is, take photos as soon as possible, whether it's of the animals involved, the condition that the person claims to have slipped or tripped on. Take the photos, take as many as you can, and store them with the incident report to make sure that that scene is documented as well as possible. And one thing, Lauren, I cannot emphasize enough is to take photos even if there's nothing there. I have so many situations come up where, someone says, I went out there and there was no puddle, there was no spill, there was nothing wrong with the ground, so I didn't take pictures. That is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the actual picture of the incident or the substance or the condition or whatever the case is, because the lack of the condition is going to be pretty much your best defense in the event of a claim down the road. So take pictures regardless of what's there. Have the person show you where they claim to have fallen or where the incident happened. If they say, hey, I fell on a sidewalk, an uneven sidewalk across the property, they start to describe it, have them show you. Go out there with them and have them show you exactly where they fell, exactly what caused them to fall, so that you can document that, and then wait to take photos when you're not in the presence of them, so you can again preserve that privilege and attach it to the incident report. Things like witness statements, if somebody saw it, obviously those would be invaluable to have attached to the incident report. And then Lauren, you'd asked about, the difference between resident and non-resident claims as well. And I mentioned, kind of that wealth of information that you have with residents. And one of those things is the resident file. With a resident, you have their lease, you have their application, you have all of their renewals, you have any addenda to the lease that they may have signed, you have their file with maintenance requests from their tenure living at the property. All of that stuff you should save and gather with the incident report so that you have as much information about that person as possible. For example, I had a recent claim come up where there was a person who claimed they were injured and claimed all these injuries as a result of a slip and fall, and claimed that they're suffering issues that were ongoing problems. And then turns out that when you went back and looked at the application and the lease, they had requested a handicap spot because they had prior mobility issues that they didn't disclose to us. So stuff like that, little things like that that you might not think are relevant, could be very relevant down the road, but you just don't know when that's going to come up. So again, this is why gathering that information as soon as possible is so important, in addition to, your classic things like the incident report and photographs. Any type of inspection reports that the property does, whether it's weekly, monthly, annually, whatever the case is. If it's an elevated surface type of inspection, a lot of properties do balcony inspections, stairwell inspections. Those could be really helpful if it occurs in that type of the property, that place on the property, or anything like that where you have ongoing maintenance, routine inspections. You're going to want to save those as well, related to the time frame, so that it's known that the property is doing the preventative measures and taking the proactive steps to ensure safety of the property. So those types of things are going to be very helpful as well. And then of course, why we're all here to talk about surveillance. Surveillance is probably one of the best, if not the best, evidence in terms of investigating incidents and determining the relevance of some of these issues that we're going to come up with after the fact, as far as what's in the resident file and what they're claiming after the fact. Surveillance is the most valuable resource to nail down those issues, figure out exactly what happened, when it happened, and what we need to be looking for.
Right. And as we talked about earlier, the last bullet here, saving footage before and after, and even later. Like if someone, you want to speak to that, because if someone claims they can't, move their back or they're unstable, and then you see them playing tennis out on the tennis courts, 3 days later, let's speak to that a little bit.
Right, of course. So there's kind of two different things that we can talk about when we talk about surveillance. Two different parts of preserving surveillance and two different ways that we can use surveillance. The first, of course, is the most common, which is the incident itself. If you have a slip and fall, a trip and fall, a security issue, a dog bite, whatever you're investigating, the incident itself is going to be the thing that you look for first and foremost when you're going through the surveillance footage. Was it caught on camera? Can we capture that? Can we download that? Can we see exactly what happened? And that's, of course, going to be the best evidence of what happened, right? So, making sure that we gather not only that footage from the incident itself, but we want to gather as much information and footage around the incident as well. So every state differs in terms of preservation rules and how much is required in terms of what you should save. A lot of times, if there's a claim and the claimant goes out and gets an attorney, and you get a preservation letter, it's going to say, hey, save all your footage 24 hours before and 24 hours after. That's typically considered excessive by most states. Most courts find an hour before and an hour after to be reasonable. And that's just that we can really figure out what happened leading up to the incident and what happened after the incident, because there's a lot of other concerns, surrounding the law that really, plays into what happened before and after. So this obligation, though, it's really important, Lauren, to emphasize that this only comes into play if it exists. So you're not obligated to have footage if it doesn't exist. You're only obligated to preserve it if it does exist. So in a situation where there's, say, motion activated cameras and they might not be triggered because there's no movement an hour before, that's okay. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't have to exist. But once it does, it needs to be saved and downloaded so that it's not lost.
And we will be showing a demo of how this works on the Cloudastructure solution. We'll be going through this again, including the incident piece of it. So I'm going to keep us moving, though, in the interest of time. So these cases, this is the, in terms of filing and keeping the information, I was surprised to learn that sometimes these cases can take up to 4 years.
Yeah, every state has a different statute of limitations. They typically run from about 2 years to about 4 years, depending on the type of claim. In terms of a personal injury type of claim or general liability type of claim, it's going to fall in that 2 to 4 year range as well. And Florida actually just switched from a 4 year to a 2 year, which has really helped some of these issues. But depending on states where you have a 4 year statute of limitations, you have to think about the fact that there could be 4 years between the date of an incident and the filing of a lawsuit. And a lot of times during that time frame, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 years, there's going to be some pre-suit activity, with the insurance company, some investigation. Maybe there's an attorney early on who's helping with some investigations, depending on how severe an incident is. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the first notice of a claim is the lawsuit. So, I mean, can you imagine if you didn't even know that a trip and fall or a slip and fall happened, and then 4 years later you suddenly get a lawsuit where someone's claiming they fell, and then now you have no, access to some of that information. And sometimes that's going to be unavoidable because someone might not report it. But most often you're going to have that time frame in between the incident and the filing of a lawsuit where you can start gathering all this information and preserving all of these things for later, because you don't know which claims are going to end up in lawsuits and end up in court. You don't know from those which are going to end up settling or which are going to go to trial, and how much information is going to be needed to get to those points. So it's really important that you just take all measures to, gather this information and preserve everything you can, because not only is the time frame increasing and more time is going by, things are being lost, you have things like staff leaves. They could be terminated. They could leave for another job. The leasing agent who helped a certain resident or who responded to a certain incident might not be there anymore. Residents, obviously move in and move out. So the resident could be gone by then. Witnesses could be gone by then. That's why it's important to make sure that we do this early preservation, so that in the event something comes up 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that it's well preserved and everybody's ready to move forward in defending the claim. And another part of that, kind of the flip side of that, Lauren, is that not all cases are favorable. I mean, sometimes cases shouldn't be defended. Sometimes there is a condition on the grounds. Accidents do happen. That's often why insurance is there, and early settlement can be an option. But that's why we want to know what happened earlier rather than later. And surveillance can tell us that. If there's a claim that's not worth pouring a lot of money and time into, then everyone wants to know that up front, so we can go ahead and settle that and move on without wasting a lot of time and money and expenses, so that we can move on to other claims that we can defend. So surveillance works, in both ways.
Yeah, and I think what stood out for me when we were talking about this is that if you're a multifamily property manager, there should be a protocol because of the staff turnover, because of the resident turnover, a protocol for how to store the information to make it easily accessible, that you can find things, because otherwise it's just a mess. You could be storing everything and then you can't even find what you stored 4 years ago, right? So,
Correct. And on that, if the property manager is the one that's doing the investigation, and they save it on a hard drive and then they leave, what good is that they did all this work to begin with? So it's important to not only do the work, but to put it in a location that's accessible to other people within the company, whether it's your risk management department, if the insurance company is involved earlier, if there's claims adjusters, things like that. You want to make sure that you get it to a location where it can be saved beyond somebody's hard drive, so that
right.
it's not lost even after that point. So,
Yeah.
getting all that, making sure it's accessible is equally important.
And of course, there's legal standards with how you store your surveillance. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so a few minutes ago, Lauren, you'd asked about the difference, between the different types of footage that we could have available to us. And we talked about the most common one, which is the footage of the incident itself. But the other part of that is the wealth of information that you can have on those types of individuals who are residents, who are, on the property all the time, who stay living at the property for some period after the incident. Because with those types of claims, you can use the footage and you can use the cameras that are already in place to gather more information. I mean, during the course of a claim, whether it's pre-suit, whether it's in litigation, attorneys and insurance companies spend a lot of money on private investigators, a lot of money. It's thousands of dollars, sometimes $1,000 a day even, to have somebody who's, who has a PI license, just to follow these people and try and get footage of them doing something active. If they say they're injured and they can't do certain things, and then, we find them out working out or playing tennis, like you mentioned, that costs a lot of money, and it's very difficult to predict when that footage or when that type of activity might be available. In this situation, where you have cameras on property and they already live there and you have access to them, you can use those cameras to determine what they're up to. Are they out running around the property? Are they, going on walks? Are they playing tennis? Are they accessing the gym? Can you see them coming and going? Do they appear to be injured? Do they have mobility issues? What's going on with them? What are they up to? Also, if they say they can't work and you see them coming and going from work every day, that's also helpful. So, the amount of information that you can gather from the surveillance footage from the cameras already in place could save a lot of time and a lot of money down the road by just simply utilizing the tools that you already have available to you.
And, this brings up facial recognition. So certain solutions out there, including ours, has facial recognition. So if there are folks that you want to track, that is something that would make it easier for you to find out if indeed that person is coming and going, as opposed to just sitting through and watching footage on an ongoing basis. But there are some legalities around facial recognition in certain states and communities. And so I believe you recommend that there's a tenant consent forms that folks sign when they sign up on their leases.
Yes, so obviously with facial recognition technologies this is, very, very new, emerging technology. A lot of people are not necessarily comfortable with it or familiar with it yet, but it's something that's, here to stay. It's something that's helpful in a lot of scenarios. And to the extent that this is available, you really want to use it to your advantage, but you have to be careful in the event that there are laws either for government use or for private use. So a lot of states and the most common restriction currently for facial recognition technology is really by government entities because there's concerns obviously for illegal search and seizure issues. You don't want to gather somebody doing something illegal and then not be able to use that footage because it was an illegal search. So there's a lot of government restrictions on this type of technology. There are fewer at this point in time, and I expect this is probably going to change in the next few years, but there are currently fewer regulations and restrictions on the private use of facial recognition technology. So with that type of situation, most of the time you would need an opt-in or a consent form to use it. So if obviously you should check with your local authorities, state and local authorities for any restrictions or laws that impact this type of technology or use of this technology. But to the extent that, your area does or your state does limit the private use of this technology, this can be addressed pretty easily by having an opt-in consent form as maybe an addendum to the lease or something that's part of a new resident packet where they can opt in or out to that facial recognition technology. And if they opt in and they've given you consent, obviously these cameras are not going to be in their private units or private offices. They're going to be in common areas. But if they opt in and you have that ability, then you can use something like this technology to find them on the property and track them down depending on if, what facilities or amenities they might be using. If they opt out, of course, it's something that you need to be mindful of. And if you're going to use this technology and you have the capabilities of using this technology, you're going to want to go back and look at that resident file and make sure that they opted in before using it to track them down. So it's just like kind of another little step that you have to do. But to the extent that that's done and you have that consent, then there's not really a concern for using it to do some of these things that we've talked about.
So one question that's come up is, if this is a criminal case, if the police ask for it, is it automatic that you have to give the footage, or what's the process for actually handing it over?
I haven't come across many scenarios where we haven't been willing to just turn it over. Obviously, I think there's always an importance of complying with law enforcement for one reason or another if they request it. If there's hesitation, they can always subpoena it, and then there would be an obligation anyway under the law. So unless there's a real reason to fight it, typically compliance is the best practice. And not it's not necessarily turning it over. Sometimes, we'll invite maybe the law enforcement officer to look at the camera first. And sometimes they might just want to look to see what footage is available. They might just want to see, it might not be a crime on the property. It could be a crime in the area where they're trying to see if your camera's picked up on something that could be helpful for them. So you can invite them to the property, you can show them the footage, and then if they request it, then you could download it and create some sort of playlist, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute, but you could create a playlist for them that is specific to their needs before you just get some blanket subpoena for all the footage. So I think to the extent that you're going to comply up front, you have control of the circumstances and the parameters as opposed to just getting a subpoena and then having to deal with complying with what the court tells you to produce.
Yeah, and we're actually getting a lot of requests now from some of our customers where we give access to the footage by the police on an ongoing basis and make it easy for them to actually see what's going on. So have you found that to be the case in your experience as well?
Certainly, I think the accessibility to this footage and the more, the technology improves too, and the more helpful it can be, we're certainly seeing more and more of that.
Yeah.
And, again, to the extent that, there's no downside to the property to turn it over, it's something that I think is helpful for everybody in terms of community safety and, to comply.
So I have a little demo here that I wanted to share with folks, but before I do, I wanted to go just touch on some of the best practices that Amanda spoke about. She had talked about write an incident report every time. And in some of these properties, we're finding that you could get 15 incident reports in a day, if not more. And so one of the things that Cloudastructure provides, and when you're looking for a solution provider, is will they do that for you? And we do that for you. So we recognize that it's extremely time consuming. And so every time there is an incident, we document the incident, we send you the footage, and we connect you. In addition, we create an escalation path working with you to identify the appropriate authorities to send alerts to when necessary, when things actually perhaps are getting out of control. Let's see if there was anything else. Saving footage up to an hour before and after. In this particular instance, you'll see that we're saving a timestamp, but just know that going back is very easy, especially if it's motion based. You could go back days and capture footage before and after, which is very relevant. But with that, I'm just going to show you how it works in our system so you get an idea of how to store some footage.
I'm going to walk you through how to download video footage, how to share the video content, and also how to create a playlist of your videos for future use. The first step of downloading your video footage, you log into your Cloudastructure account with your safe and secure credentials. You come to the dashboard and you go ahead and you select the hamburger and come to the recordings tab. Here you can select a specific camera, a specific site. We'll go ahead and select the Phoenix building. Once you get to this screen, you can expand the search up to 30 days or minimize it down to 60 minutes. We'll go ahead and select 7 days to pull from for data. Say you had somebody come in and steal a package at your community. You want to come down here, type in that package. You'll quickly see that it eliminates all the other video footage that does not pertain to that tag and pulls up solely only the videos that will have those tags in it. So you can go ahead and drill down into the video footage. Here we see the UPS delivery driver coming in with the packages.
I'm just going to pause for 1 second here. As you could see, Whitney originally showed a bunch of green bars, which is all the motion video. And you could see within seconds, you can identify only the video relevant to the package, saving so much time. And that really is the artificial intelligence that tags every piece of the footage that allows you to search very quickly. And then she'll show you how you can actually store the footage as well.
Maybe that's not the video footage we're looking for. We'll go ahead to the next one. Here's another UPS driver coming. Maybe this is the video footage that we want to share. So downloading the video footage, if this is something you want to download longer for 30 days, you can actually come down and hit this arrow button, our download button in the right-hand lower corner. Once you select that, it'll actually download to your hard drive and you can save it for as many years as you would like on that external hard drive.
Yeah, so one of the things that Amanda and I talked about when we saw this video is make sure when you are downloading the footage that you label it correctly. And Amanda, you had some nice guidelines. You want to share what those are?
So if it's pertaining to a specific incident that's really building your unit focus, I would put the unit ahead of time, ahead of this, whatever you're saving. So if it's, unit 307, you would, put 307, package 307 theft, 307 delivery, whatever the case is, and save each clip, however you're saving it, with the unit number first. Or if it's a resident related issue, an incident, for example, you could put the resident's name first, followed by the different descriptions after that. That way, when you're sorting through the saved documents, you can find the unit number or the resident, as opposed to having to go through hundreds of files on your hard drive to figure out which ones might be relevant.
Right. And in addition, you'd be getting an incident report from us. So when you save these files, the incident reports could go right in there with them. So I'll continue here.
If you are needing to share the video footage, you can come to the 3-dot toggle up here in the middle of the screen. You simply click on it. You put in the recipient's email address. So that could be different ownership group, that could be insurance provider, local authorities. You simply type in the email address. It will send a safe and secure link for 7 days of access to whoever you need to bring into the loop and share the videos with. It's as simple as that. The email is successfully sent, and now you have shared your video footage. If you'd like to create a playlist and start collectively organizing your video content and creating a playlist, you simply hit this bookmark arrow. You can then create a new playlist, or if you have an existing playlist, add that video footage and it will start accumulating the video footage and save for up to a year of storage free of charge.
Right.
So we'll go ahead and add it.
So I'm going to close this out here, but you might, again, based on Amanda's recommendation, name a playlist based on a particular unit number or et cetera. So you have all the footage associated with the unit as opposed to a type of incident. And any other comments on this video, Amanda?
Yeah, so one thing I think we talked about earlier, right, Lauren, was the difference between the incident footage and then the post-incident footage. And, that also kind of gives rise to a question of pre-incident footage too. I mean, you just saw Whitney show us that we can go back 30 days as well. So for example, what if you have someone that came and claims to have slipped and fallen or something like that, and they tell you it happened yesterday? Well, then you've got 29, days to go back and see what they were up to afterwards. Maybe they were already injured. Maybe they were already limping on the property, but you could also go back and figure out what they were doing before the incident or, whatever happened leading up to the incident. And that could be with a criminal incident, that could be any type of incident we've talked about where, any time frame prior to the incident could also be helpful based on the ability to go back 30 days. So there's a potential based on what you showed us that we could have multiple playlists. We could have a playlist from before the incident. We could have a playlist from the incident itself or the footage of the incident itself. And then we could have playlists or multiple playlists from that footage of the person after, if they're still living on property, and we're using that technology to gather information after the fact. And, we talked about the, issues with the facial recognition technology, but just because someone doesn't opt in or if it's not available, that doesn't mean you can't download the surveillance. It just means you can't use the facial recognition technology to locate them on property. So if you are able to find them on property, say, obviously, what building they live in and what parking lot they utilize, you can still go through the videos and find them using, standard just search technology without having to use the facial recognition if they opt out or if it's not available or if it's illegal in your area, but you can still have access to that information. So as you're putting these playlists together and you're labeling them and creating them maybe by day or week or however you want to do it and you're saving them, one thing that's really important that I don't think we really touched on yet is the difference between, a privileged file and a non-privileged file in terms of disclosures when you get into litigation. So whenever you're doing these investigations, things like your incident reports and your photographs and your statements, those are all going to be prepared in anticipation of a claim, and those can all be privileged, protected from discovery. But the incident itself, most often you're going to have to turn that over, whether it's the beginning of the case and discovery, whether it's after a plaintiff's deposition, depending on what the laws are, what the courts rule in your jurisdiction, you're probably going to have to turn over the incident footage at some point. But you do not necessarily have to turn over that other footage until there becomes a time when you decide to use it. So say you're using it and you're getting all this great footage of someone and you decided that you don't want to turn it over, you don't want to disclose it all the way up until you catch them in some, great lie, or maybe you don't even get great surveillance, maybe you're just doing it and you're not getting anything that's kind of your smoking gun. You don't have to disclose it. You can disclose it at a time when you decide that you want to use it in the case. So keeping those playlists separate so that you don't have to worry about waiving a privilege is also very important. And this is where that playlist feature can also really help you out in keeping the different types of footage separate.
Good point. Good point. I encourage everyone, if you have questions, now is the time. We have Amanda here really giving you some great legal advice. So please put your questions in the chat. I did get a question on whether or not Cloudastructure makes you rip and replace your cameras with proprietary cameras. And the answer is no. We work with most standard-based IP cameras as well as analog cameras with an encoder. We do provide cameras if you need them, but if you have them already, generally speaking, we work with them. So we do preserve your investment there. Let's see if I have any other questions here. Amanda, any questions you think might come up?
I think the biggest question people have, might have, especially people the people that are at least deciding whether to use technology like this, is about the cost, right? And whether how costly it's going to be to use something like this or install the cameras if they don't already have them, or to utilize the services that you offer. And just on our end, we come into this case, we come into the scenario typically so long after the incident has happened, and by that point a lot of money has been spent, a lot of time has been spent, a lot of money is going to go into litigating a case. So a lot of times, I mentioned things like the investigator that costs a lot of money that you could maybe avoid. So some of these things I think are going to be cost saving measures up front, because again, as I mentioned earlier, if you know a claim is bad, if you know there's a situation, a security claim, your gate wasn't shut, someone came in, or there was a parking lot issue or property damage or whatever the case is, if you know you have an issue, you want to know as soon as possible so that you can shut it down before you spend time and money on the claim or defending the claim or investigating the claim. So a lot of these things are going to be saving measures down the road, instead of having to pay for, attorneys to work the case up for 5 years.
Do folks have to put signs up that they're being watched? Is that necessary?
It's not necessary. I mean, again, it depends on maybe your specific jurisdiction. I mean, there might be certain state or local laws that might trigger these all over the country, depending on where you are. But for the most part, there's generally no concern about privacy in public areas. Obviously, you're never going to put cameras in someone's unit or inside the manager's office, or, private offices or whatever on the property. But there's generally no expectation of privacy in a public place or in a common area. So that's not too much of a concern. Now, there are benefits to putting signs, such as deterrence. I mean, anytime you have a sign that there's cameras and that it's, being monitored, actively being monitored, that's going to serve as a deterrent for criminals who are going to try and come on the property and cause harm or property damage or whatever the case is. So it's not required, but there's also benefits to doing so.
Okay. Are there increasing risks from deep fake videos happening? Like, are people actually manipulating the video?
I haven't seen that happen yet, but I'm not going to say that's not coming with all the technology and the different capabilities. I mean, obviously that's a huge issue now, deep fakes and everything that can be done with technology and AI. There's a lot of concerns with that. That's not going away. At this point, we haven't seen a lot of issues with that in the claims context, but that's why things like your timestamps, date and timestamps are important. The watermarking on the videos, things that help prove authenticity, so that when the videos are downloaded, whether they're downloaded for civil purposes, whether they're turned over to law enforcement, things like those timestamps and the watermarking and the encryption when you're sending the videos can help protect against some of those questions of authenticity and allow for a smooth chain of custody.
I am working on answering the question that is in the chat, but another question that has come up is, what are some typical mistakes that you see that ruin the validity of surveillance footage in court?
That there's mistakes that ruin the validity. I mean, I think the biggest issue is not preserving enough that's available and just not preserving the video in general. I mean, I actually have had a number of situations where there is obviously, there's an incident happened when you finish the incident report, when someone reports it. That doesn't necessarily mean a claim is going to be made right away. It could be a year before a claim is made. And then you think, hey, it's too late to go back and preserve this footage. But then, you have a witness that comes in and says, oh, no, I saw the footage. It existed. And then it just takes an otherwise great case and just everything kind of comes crashing down because you didn't preserve it. So again, if you don't have it, you don't have to have it. But if you did have it at one point, you need to download it, you need to preserve it, you need to have as much as possible, not just, the incident, but the time frame before and after that's available, so that you don't run into spoliation issues. Because I think the biggest mistake is running into spoliation issues that can otherwise be avoided, where you then have either your video stricken or some sort of adverse instruction to the jury because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. So just making sure that you, again, preserve it, save it, keep it, make sure it's not on someone's hard drive that's going to leave the company, that you don't, no one else has access to it, things like that, where, along the way, the video could be lost or compromised.
And then the question in the chat is, when a person gets the link to view the footage, you might recall when Whitney was sharing the email, does that person get to view it on a browser and can they download it? And the answer is yes, they can download it. Right now, you cannot set permissions as to whether or not someone can download it or not. It's if you share it, it can be downloaded. And you decide who you want to send it to. But that is a good point. That could be something that we add down the line if permissions are required, but nobody has really requested that at this time. Any other questions that people have? I'm trying to see here if I have anything here.
And Lauren, on that note, while we're waiting for other questions to come in, if people have concerns about sharing it because there aren't permissions at this point and emailing it, that's something that can also be addressed by downloading it to an external hard drive or your hard drive, and then putting it on a flash drive or a disk or some other type of device that can be shared that way. That way, if you wanted to password protect the CD or the flash drive, you could do it that way and then only share it through a flash drive, as opposed to having it out there via email where, it could be downloaded, then you don't really know what happens to it after that.
Well, I am not seeing any other questions. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you found this to be informative. And I do want to thank Amanda once again for the valuable information that she continues to provide our customers and our prospects. If you have any questions about Cloudastructure, you can email me at lauren@cloudastructure.com or info@cloudastructure.com. We'll get it. And then Amanda will put your email in the chat as well. If you need legal representation or legal advice in any way, we do recommend that you consider Cobb and Gonzalez. Any closing statements, Amanda?
No, I think that's it. I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you about surveillance. I think what you guys are doing with your capabilities is really helpful, and it makes a lot of this easier down the road. So it's certainly something that, is really nice to see that's out there that could be a valuable resource. But again, there's sometimes just things come up, and it can't be avoided when you get to court, and that's why we're here. And whether you're claim is in Florida or wherever it is, we can certainly help point you in the right direction. So, feel
Terrific.
free to reach out at any time if you have questions.
Yeah, and if there's certain topics that you want to explore, again, give us ideas. We're here to provide you guys with information with respect to the best security possible. And so if there's particular topics you want us to cover, feel free to reach out and let us know, and we'll gladly host a webinar on it. Thanks again, Amanda. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.